Hi, Kevin here again with another video on The Walking Dead. This is part 2 of a video about Season 2, Episode 10, the episode titled 18 Miles Out. There are going to be spoilers in this video, not just for this episode, but spoilers also for the rest of Season 2. So if you haven't seen the rest of the season, you shouldn't watch this. Also, just a note, as I always say, my reviews, my videos tend to be less about the action and speculation than they are about trying to interpret what things happen and to try to pull some of the ideas of the program out and discuss those. So if you're just looking for the sort of blood and guts stuff, probably not the video for you. In my previous, so this is Season 2, Episode 10, 18 Miles Out. This is the episode in which Beth tries to commit suicide on the farm and Rick and Shane battle, and Shane tries to kill Rick in the town. I'm going to talk about the women first, but I want to make a couple general comments, or specific comments really, about the structure of this episode. It has a very interesting structure. It has all really short scenes that are cut really fast, quickly between one another. And there are 20 scenes in this episode. There are 20 scenes in the episode, some of which are shorter than 1 minute long. In the second half of the episode, for the last 10 of the 20 scenes, there isn't a scene that's even 3 minutes long of the 10 final scenes. So things really speed up in the second half of that episode. And I think the idea here is, obviously to build suspense and keep the action going. But I think when you see what's going on, especially with Rick and Shane, that energy, that frenetic and frenzied energetic pace is really suggests that things are spinning out of control here in some ways, which we'll discuss. The other thing that I want to note about these scenes, jumping back and forth, is that we never see men and women together in the same scene. It doesn't happen a single time in this episode. And the reason, I think, is because, well, the episode is examining two things: women's roles and men's roles, and how they live up to those roles or resist them or reject them in various ways. So that's what I'm going to be discussing. In my previous video, I discussed women's roles. In this one, I'll be discussing the men's roles and then how they combine. So let's start with Rick and Shane driving at the beginning of the episode toward town. And they reach a crossroads. And a crossroads literally is somewhere where you can decide which direction to take. That's what it is. Symbolically, of course, a crossroads is kind of turning point, a point in one's life where he or she makes a decision to go in a certain direction, figuratively, right? So if you reach a crossroads with your girlfriend that you're arguing with, you might decide to break up with her or stay with her. That's the crossroads. So Rick and Shane reach a crossroads. It's going to be important to the episode. And they get out of the car, and Rick says, "We have to talk." And he says, and it's not just about having to do with Randall, it's about their relationship. And Rick says he knows that Shane killed Otis, and Shane said, "I did it to survive." And he says, "You know what? No, Otis didn't belong in this world, and neither do you." Because, of course, Shane still has the feeling that Rick just isn't cut out for this world, that Rick can't protect his family. Shane really believes that. And he really thinks that Rick is inadequate in a lot of ways. What's interesting about that is when you think of masculine roles and the idea of men being inadequate, one way to think of that is to think of it sexually, right? Now, Rick obviously isn't sexually inadequate. We know that he has sex with Lori. He may even be the father of that baby. But there's only one character who we've actually seen having sex, one male character, and it's Shane with Lori in Season 1. So Shane already represents a kind of masculine sexual power or sexual energy. So when and we see that again, by the way, when Andrea grabs Shane's package out on the road after they've been doing target practice and had their argument. So Shane really stands for a traditional masculine role of being highly sexualized. And when he says that Rick is inadequate, it doesn't mean that he's saying Rick is sexually inadequate. But certainly, he's questioning Rick on the same sort of fundamental level and judging Rick to be inadequate. And Rick, of course, argues with that, and Rick says, "Look, you aren't going to be a danger to us anymore. And don't be mistaken by thinking that me not attacking you when I found out about you and Lori was weakness. I wanted to break your jaw, but just because I didn't, don't treat that as a weakness. It took everything I had to stop from doing that. So Rick is asserting his strength here because he knows that Shane doesn't respect that strength. We've seen that in previous episodes. We're going to see it more in this episode and more as the season progresses. So they're back in the car and they're driving along, and Shane is looking out the window. He's just staring out the window at the landscape, and you can see that he's contemplating, right? He's just thinking. We don't know what he's thinking about, of course. We don't get to hear his interior monologue, but he's got to be thinking about that conversation and about Rick having said, you don't love Lori, and this perhaps may be where Shane first gets the idea that he's got to kill Rick. What supports that argument is that it's in the town shortly after this that he throws that huge wrench at Rick after their fight. So perhaps when he's thinking here, he's thinking of killing Rick. One interesting thing about this is we see this scene again basically at the end of the episode. Rick driving, Shane looking out the window, head leaned against the window looking out at the landscape. But there's a bit of a continuity problem. At first I thought it was just the same scene replayed at the end because Shane sees the walker, that well-dressed walker stumbling through the fields both times. The problem is that we know it's not the same trip, same drive, because Shane isn't bleeding the first time and he is bleeding the second time from the fight with Rick. But there's a continuity problem because as Shane is in the passenger seat heading into town, he sees the walker. On the way out, back to the farm, of the passenger side, he still sees the walker. But the walker should be on the driver's side now, right? He shouldn't be able to see it out that window. So a bit of a continuity problem. Not such a big deal. What I'm more interested in terms of that is Rick adopting the same posture both times. Remember that they've crossed a crossroads now twice, into the town and then back to the farm. Problem is for Shane, moving past those crossroads hasn't really changed him in any way. He hasn't decided, for instance, to choose life, as I said about Beth in my first video. But instead of changing his mind, it's just made him more and more determined that he's going to get rid of Rick, that he has to do it. So that's what's going on there. As they're driving toward town the first time, Rick says to Shane, we have to cut down on the guns. We have to save ammo. And he says we need to start using knives. Well, knives become very important in this episode in a bunch of ways. When they finally get into the town, see a walker. Shane's impulse, Shane is very impulsive, is to shoot the walker. This is just after Rick has said we have to start using knives. Rick stops him for a very practical reason. Gonna waste ammo if you shoot and could draw walkers. So don't shoot. And this is the first of 3 times that actually Rick stops Shane from shooting someone. The first 2 times being Randall. The second 2 times being Randall. Anyhow, Rick takes out his knife. Remember, he says we have to start using knives. He cuts his hand. He smears the blood on the fence to attract the walker. He stabs the walker through the head. All good. It's very interesting that he cuts his hand. And of course, we see Shane cut his hand too. When you see 2 guys cutting hands, at least for me, the image is of a bond, right? That you cut your hand to become blood brothers. We see Shane cut his hand again to smear the blood on the frame of the bus door to attract the walkers' heads in to stab them. So you could associate that cutting of hands with knives as being, something that would link them, that they would shake hands, the blood unites them, they become blood brothers. That's what's known as a blood oath, a strong commitment to one another. The thing is here, though, that they cut their hands and out comes the blood, but they never shake hands. They don't become connected. If anything, they become more disconnected. And when they draw blood again, it's to draw each other's bloods in their violent fight. So that's one way in which the knife is important symbolically. Knife is also important because we see it lying on the ground. Rick has left it for Randall to cut himself free. And as Rick and Shane fight, we see Randall crawling to that knife. That's right, big close-up with Randall in the background as he does that. Knife shows up again when Rick has the 3 walkers on top of him. He shot the 3rd walker through the mouth of the 2nd, and he's out of bullets. Click, 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 click. And he turns, and there's the knife by his head again. So the knife, the knife, the knife. Also, of course, back on the farm, remember Rick has said we need to start using knives. Beth has decided to start using a knife, to use it to kill herself, right? So knives really are important to this episode. There's also some foreshadowing going on here of the Better Angels episode. Rick again tells Shane here, we have to cut down on guns, we need to start using knives. What happens when Shane is killed in the Better Angels episode? Shane is trying to use a gun. He's going to take Rick's gun from him, and Shane is going to shoot Rick. But Rick has a knife, and Rick stabs Shane to death through the heart with the knife. So Rick's saying we need to start using knives in this episode, and all the uses of the knife, and the knife as a central figure in this episode really foreshadows what's going to happen later in the season. So, and we could say also because the knife is used so much or seen so much in the town, but also seen by Beth, used by Beth at the farm, we could say the knife links these 2 worlds somehow. Just as the men and the women are in conflict in both places, the knife links them. The knife is suggestive of conflict and of violence, of course, right? So that imagery connects both places. So I suppose knowing that the knife connects the 2 places hopefully encourages us to think about other ways that the 2 places are connected, such as in the way that men and women fulfill their roles as men and women. So, Shane and Rick fight. And why do they fight in the town? Because they're arguing over Randall, and Shane finally says to Rick again, I don't think you can protect them. I don't think you can protect Lori and Carl. Rick has had enough. That's the straw that's broke the camel's back. The fight starts. Shane's getting the better of it for a while. And then after Rick pounds Shane down and walks away, Shane grabs that huge wrench and throws it and misses. It's important, of course, that we see here that Shane has become, deathly violent. He wants to kill Rick now. But what's interesting about the scene is that the wrench goes through the window of the building, and there's a broken pane of glass, and we see Shane's face reflected in the glass. And Shane looks very much like a walker here because he's bleeding, and just the tilt of his head, it's tilted to one side. It's sort of reminiscent of the Shane we'll see when Carl kills him as a walker. But what we see there is Shane's reflection, and he looks like a walker, and then we see the walker's hand and arm come up, and the walker's body come up in the same pane of glass. Well, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the walker, it could foreshadow that Shane's going to become a walker in just a few episodes. But the fact that Shane sees that reflection, then the walker enters that reflection, what that might tell us is that Shane and the walkers have become really, at least morally, indistinguishable from each other right now. Because both of them want to cause the death of humans. It used to be that Shane just wanted to kill Randall. Now Shane wants to kill Rick too, just as the walker that first comes out heads for Rick and tries to kill him. Okay. Shane runs to the bus. It looks like Rick and Randall are going to leave him. But as Rick is heading to the car with Randall, he looks down and he sees those 2 cops that Rick and Shane had killed earlier, right? And we know they're cops and not security guards because they have the little badge. Anyhow, as they're going by, Rick stops and he looks at them. And you can see him thinking. And what he's thinking is of himself and Shane. Because there are these 2 cops side by side in uniform, just as Rick and Shane were when we first saw them in the series. Together, brothers, looking after one another, strong friends, strong allies. Now, they're not literally dead, like these 2 cops, but they're figuratively dead, because their relationship is dead. And it's Rick looking at that and seeing himself and Shane there dead that I think drives him to say, you know what? I have to try to save us. I have to try to get us back to that world of similar uniforms and friendship and commitment to one another. And so they jump the car, the cavalry comes, they save Shane. The last thing I want to say, and I have very little time to say, is as they're driving back toward that crossroads again, as they're checking on Randall in the trunk, there's a song playing, and it's a song called Driver's Seat. Perfect song for this, because what we see at the end, literally, is Rick driving. But figuratively, what this means is that Rick is in control. Rick is in the driver's seat. Rick is the one who's taken charge. Rick is the one who's going to guide, protect his family and his friends.